The Klondike Gold Rush did not begin with abundance. It began with distance. Gold was discovered in a region that was cold, remote, and largely inaccessible. Reaching it required time, money, and physical endurance long before a single claim could be worked. Yet people came anyway. By the late 1890s, tens of thousands began moving toward the Klondike, drawn by reports of rich deposits along the Yukon River and its tributaries. The gold was real. The geography was unforgiving. From the outside, the rush appeared similar to California. Gold had been found. Opportunity seemed open, and success appeared to favor those willing to endure more. Most of those assumptions proved false. Text according to contemporary accounts, the majority of people who attempted the journey never reached productive claims. Some turned back before arriving. Others arrived too late. Many spent more on supplies and transport than they would ever recover. In the Klondike, the cost of participation was immediate. Food, equipment, and permits were mandatory. Travel routes were narrow and dangerous. Failure often occurred before mining even began. This was not a rush defined by discovery. It was a rush defined by survival. So why did so many people attempt one of the most expensive and dangerous gold rushes in history? And how did a place known for gold become better known for what it took away? Long before anyone reached the Klondike gold fields, the rush had already begun to thin. Text: the journey itself acted as a filter. Unlike California, where access was difficult but flexible, the Klondike offered only a few narrow routes. Each required weeks or months of travel through terrain that was hostile even in good conditions. According to historical records, Canadian authorities required miners to carry a full year's supply of food before being allowed to cross into the region. This was not our suggestion. It was a condition for entry. The logic was simple. Without sufficient supplies, people would starve. The land could not support large numbers of newcomers. There were no established supply chains waiting at the end of the trail. For those attempting the journey, this requirement changed everything. Food, equipment, clothing, and tools had to be purchased in advance. Text: the total weight often exceeded a ton per person. Transporting it required multiple trips across mountain passes, rivers, and frozen ground. This turned the journey into a prolonged test of endurance. People carried loads repeatedly over the same paths. They cached supplies, returned for more, and advanced slowly. In some cases, the journey from the coast to the goldfields took longer than the mining itself. Not everyone made it through this phase. Some ran out of money before finishing the journey. Others turned back after realizing the scale of the effort required. Illness, injury, and exhaustion ended many attempts quietly and without record. By the time a person reached the Klondike, they had already paid a significant price. Text: the rush rewarded those who could endure delay, cost, and uncertainty long before gold came into view. And for many, that price exceeded anything the gold could realistically repay. Reaching the Klondike did not guarantee success. Even among those who completed the journey, timing remained decisive. The first discoveries along Bonanza Creek and nearby streams were claimed quickly. Early arrivals encountered gold that could still be worked with basic tools, but this window was brief. According to contemporary records, news of productive claims spread faster than the gold could sustain. Within months, most easily accessible ground was taken. Late arrivals faced a different reality. Claims were smaller. Ground had already been reworked. Returns were unpredictable and often marginal. Text, unlike California, where movement between locations was relatively easy, the Klondike offered limited alternatives. Once in the region, options narrowed sharply. The landscape constrained choice. Productive creeks were few. Travel between them was slow and costly. Winter closed routes entirely. For many miners, this created a dead end. They had already invested heavily in reaching the Klondike. Leaving meant abandoning both sunk costs and the hope that persistence might still pay off. Some tried to rework abandoned claims, hoping earlier miners had missed something. Others attempted small-scale operations on marginal ground. Occasionally, these efforts succeeded. More often, they did not. The Klondike did not evenly distribute opportunity. It compressed it. Text, a small number of claims produced extraordinary wealth. A much larger number produced just enough to sustain continued effort, and nothing more. This imbalance reinforced belief. Visible success stories circulated widely. They suggested that fortune remained possible, even as the underlying odds continued to deteriorate. For those who arrived late, the Klondike did not announce that it was finished. It simply became quieter about who it rewarded. In the Klondike, survival was not incidental to mining. It was the primary expense. Unlike earlier gold rushes, basic necessities in the Klondike were scarce, expensive, and difficult to replace. Food, fuel, clothing, and shelter had to be secured before winter, or not at all. Text, according to historical accounts, prices in Dawson City and surrounding camps rose rapidly as demand outpaced supply. Items that were inexpensive elsewhere became luxuries. Fresh food was rare. Fuel determined whether a person could endure the cold. Winter reshaped priorities. Mining slowed or stopped entirely when the ground froze. Income disappeared precisely when costs increased. Heating, food storage, and shelter became matters of survival rather than comfort. For many miners, this created a paradox. They could not mine without enduring winter, but enduring winter required resources that mining no longer reliably provided. Those who had arrived with limited funds faced immediate pressure. Some sold equipment to buy food. Others took on debt at unfavorable terms. Text, a number worked for wages instead of pursuing their own claims, delaying any chance of personal success. The longer someone stayed, the more dependent they became on local systems they did not control. Suppliers, landlords, and transport operators continued to earn. Miners absorbed the risk. This structure mirrored earlier rushes, but intensified it. In the Klondike, even temporary failure carried permanent consequences. A missed season could mean another year of expenses without income, leaving required resources many no longer possessed. The gold was still there, but access to it was increasingly conditional, not just on effort or timing, but on the ability to survive long enough to keep trying. And for many, that condition proved impossible to meet. Text, by the time many miners realized how narrow their chances had become, logic alone was no longer guiding decisions. Expectation had taken over. The Klondike was saturated with stories, not averages, but extremes. A single successful claim could circulate through camps for months, retold with increasing certainty and diminishing context. According to contemporary accounts, these stories shaped behavior far more than statistics ever could. People did not measure probability, they measured proximity. If someone nearby had succeeded, then success felt close, even if it was rare. This distorted perception of risk Miners evaluated their situation not against the thousands who failed, but against the few who visibly won. Failure was quiet. Success was loud. Text each additional season spent in the Klondike reinforced commitment. Time already invested became a reason to invest more. Supplies already purchased justified continued effort. Leaving meant admitting that the cost had exceeded the outcome. This was not irrational in the moment. For many, there was no clear alternative. Returning home meant starting over with fewer resources than before. Staying preserved the possibility, however small, that effort might still align with reward. The environment encouraged this delay. Winter slowed decision-making. Isolation reduced outside perspective. Community norms rewarded endurance over exit. People spoke of one more season, then another. The Klondike did not require deception to function. It relied on delay. Text as long as success remained theoretically possible, many chose to continue, even as the practical conditions that enabled success eroded further. By the time reality became unavoidable, the cost of leaving had grown too high. The gold rush did not collapse expectations suddenly. It stretched them thinly, quietly, and over time. And that stretching was enough to keep thousands in motion long after the numbers no longer supported hope. Even as most miners struggled to break even, the Klondike continued to generate steady profit, just not from gold. According to historical records, businesses that supported the rush often fared better than those who chased it. Merchants, transport operators, and landowners operated in an environment where demand was constant and alternatives were limited. Text food had to be purchased, equipment had to be repaired or replaced, shelter had to be secured, especially during winter. Prices reflected this dependency. Supplies transported along the Yukon River or over mountain passes carried high markups. Freight costs were passed directly to miners, regardless of their success underground. For those controlling access, risk was minimal. They did not need gold to be found. They only needed miners to keep trying. Some individuals recognized this early. A number of early arrivals shifted from prospecting to commerce, selling goods, transportation, or services to others who still believed mining would pay off. These roles offered predictable income in a place defined by uncertainty. Land ownership followed a similar pattern. Text plots near Dawson City and key routes increased in value as population concentrated. Rent became another fixed cost miners had to absorb, independent of their results. This created a quiet inversion. The rush was named for gold, but much of the reliable wealth came from persistence, not discovery. Miners provided labor, time, and demand. Others captured the value created by that persistence. The longer the rush continued, the more this structure stabilized. Gold production fluctuated. The supporting economy did not. For many participants, this meant that staying in the Klondike no longer involved chasing gold. It involved sustaining a system that extracted value from their continued presence. And that system worked best when people stayed hopeful, but not successful. Text in the Klondike, the decision to leave was rarely simple. By the time many miners considered it seriously, departure itself had become expensive. Travel routes were seasonal. Winter closed paths. Spring floods delayed movement. Leaving at the wrong time could be as dangerous as staying. According to personal accounts, many people postponed departure not because they believed success was likely, but because exit was impractical. They waited for better weather. They waited to recover enough money for transport. They waited for one more opportunity to justify the cost already paid. Time worked against them. Each additional month in the Klondike required food, fuel, and shelter. Savings diminished steadily. Debt accumulated quietly. Text: what made this period especially difficult was the absence of clear failure. Mining continued. Claims were still worked. Gold was still found somewhere. There was no announcement that the rush was over. This ambiguity encouraged delay. Leaving meant locking in loss. Staying allowed the possibility, however remote, that loss might still be offset. Social pressure reinforced this hesitation. Communities valued endurance. Those who stayed were seen as committed. Those who left often did so quietly, without ceremony or acknowledgement. The Klondike did not trap people physically. It trapped them through timing. The longer someone remained, the more their past investment argued against exit. Money spent became justification for spending more. Time lost demanded more time to compensate. Text: by the time many accepted that gold would not repay what the journey had already cost, they had little left to carry home, financially or psychologically. The rush did not end most stories with collapse. It ended them with exhaustion. When the Klondike Gold Rush began to slow, it did not leave behind emptiness. It left behind adjustment. Dawson City did not disappear overnight. Neither did the surrounding camps. They contracted gradually as opportunity narrowed and population thinned. According to historical records, many who remained were no longer prospectors. They were workers, merchants, clerks, or service providers in a place that no longer promised rapid transformation. Mining continued, but on different terms. Large claims consolidated under fewer owners. Text: operations became more organized, more capital-intensive, and less accessible to individuals. The period of personal discovery ended quietly. For those who had arrived expecting a brief gamble, this shift was decisive. The Klondike became a place where staying meant settling, and settling meant accepting outcomes far smaller than originally imagined. Infrastructure built during the rush outlived the rush itself. Roads, buildings, and supply routes remained. They supported a reduced population and a slower economy. What they no longer supported was the belief that effort alone could produce wealth. The landscape reflected this change. Abandoned equipment remained scattered along trails and riverbanks. Former camps were absorbed back into the environment. Text: the signs of intensity faded, but traces of persistence remained. The Klondike had been reshaped, not into a center of wealth, but into a reminder. A reminder that extraordinary effort had passed through the region, and that only a fraction of that effort had been rewarded. The gold did not vanish. It simply became insufficient to justify what had already been spent to reach it. And that imbalance defined what the Klondike became after the rush moved on. From a distance, the Klondike Gold Rush appears successful. Gold was extracted in significant quantities. New towns were built. The region entered global awareness almost overnight, but historical analysis paints a more uneven picture. Text: according to later records, only a small percentage of those who attempted the Klondike journey recovered more value than they spent. For most participants, the financial outcome was neutral at best, and negative far more often. What made the Klondike distinctive was not the absence of gold, but the ratio between cost and reward. The expense of participation was unusually high. Travel, supplies, permits, and survival consumed resources before mining even began. Returns had to exceed these costs simply to break even. Few did. For governments and institutions, the rush had different effects. Canada strengthened its administrative presence in the Yukon. Trade routes expanded. Infrastructure developed that would not have existed otherwise. These outcomes mattered historically. Text they did not benefit most miners directly. The Klondike thus became a case study, not of failure, but of misaligned incentives. People responded rationally to visible success stories. They underestimated cumulative cost. They overestimated how long opportunity would remain open. History remembered the winners because they were remarkable. It forgot the majority because their outcomes were ordinary, defined by endurance rather than gain. The Klondike did not produce widespread poverty. It produced widespread disappointment. And disappointment, unlike disaster, rarely anchors collective memory. For those who lived through the Klondike Gold Rush, the experience did not end with departure. It stayed with them. Text many who returned home did so quietly, carrying little evidence of what the journey had cost. They rarely spoke in detail about the months of labor, isolation, and uncertainty. What remained was a recalibrated sense of risk. According to personal letters and later accounts, former Klondike miners often became more cautious or more restless. Some avoided large risks entirely. Others continued to chase opportunity elsewhere, convinced that failure had been circumstantial rather than structural. The rush reshaped expectations. It demonstrated that effort could be extreme and outcomes still minimal, that preparation did not guarantee reward, and that visible success stories were not reliable indicators of probability. For younger participants, the Klondike delayed stable adulthood. Text years spent traveling, surviving, and waiting were years not spent building durable livelihoods. For older ones, the cost narrowed remaining options. Health was affected as well. Cold injuries, malnutrition, and exhaustion left lasting marks. Some never fully recovered physically. Others carried psychological fatigue, a reluctance to invest deeply again. Yet the Klondike also normalized something broader. It reinforced the idea that opportunity justified extraordinary sacrifice, that enduring hardship was itself a rational response to potential reward. This logic did not disappear with a rush. It resurfaced in later migrations, booms, and speculative ventures, often with similar outcomes. The Klondike taught a lesson that was not written down. Text that systems built on extreme cost filter participants long before reward appears, and that by the time clarity arrives, most have already paid more than they can recover. The Klondike Gold Rush was never defined by absence. Gold existed. It was found, and a small number of people became extraordinarily wealthy because of it. What defined the Klondike was cost. The price of participation was paid upfront in money, time, health, and endurance. By the time gold came into view, most people had already spent more than it could realistically return. This imbalance shaped everything that followed. Those who succeeded did so early, or under conditions that could not be repeated. Those who arrived later were not misinformed. They were misled by scale, distance, and delay. Text the Klondike did not promise equality of outcome. It promised opportunity without explaining probability. That promise was enough. People endured extreme hardship not because they misunderstood the risk, but because they believed effort would eventually align with reward. For most, it did not. History remembers the Klondike as a triumph of endurance and discovery. But endurance was common. Discovery was rare. The rush worked as a system. It moved people. It built infrastructure. It expanded control over a remote region. But as an opportunity for individuals, it demanded more than it paid. The Klondike stands as a reminder that some forms of wealth are protected not by secrecy, but by distance, difficulty, and cost. The gold was real text, but by the time most people reached it, they had already spent what it would take to make it matter.